Hey everybody, this is Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. So something a little different for all you vintage people. Something you should be doing as a regular maintenance is changing the gearbox oil on your shifty Vespas. So pretty much any Vespa has a manual transmission. They're all going to use pretty much the same oil. Originally it was spec'd as like a non-detergent 30 weight oil, but there's modern replacements such as this trans oil. It's compatible with the cork clutches in the scooters. Find it on Scooter West web store. This is enough to do at least 4 changes on a vintage Vespa. They don't use much, and I'll show you how to do it. If you're wondering how often to do an oil change on your gearbox on a vintage Vespa, I would say probably every 3,000 miles, 5,000 kilometers, every 2 years, year and a half, because oils sometimes can get contaminated, not only with moisture in the air, but oftentimes with these vintage Vespas that they flood out pretty heavily. It may leak past the main seals, and you might have a surprise like a lot of gas diluted oil in your gearbox, and that's not good for the gears or the bearings. So let's get right to it. Pretty simple the job to do. Only one special tool you need, just an 11mm socket, and there's a couple other things that help you out along the way. So put some safety squints on. You have 2 bolts on a large frame Vespa. All the other Vespas are pretty similar. If you have something like a Super Sport or the GS 160, they have a very large magnetic drain plug that was unique. The small frames are in slightly different spots. But not only is the fill bolt for filling the oil, it's also a check bolt. So typically I like doing a check before I drain the oil. I use this thing off-road sometimes, so it's a little grungy, and vintage Vespas are kind of known to weep and drip some oil, so that's why it looks a little bit like chocolate on the motor. That's what I like to think about that. That actually protects the motor from corrosion in many ways. So, but I do want to clean it off. I don't want any of this going into the fill hole, so I got some like brake parts cleaner, obviously with some safety glasses here, little wire brush. And the little bolt is pretty unique. It's a 8mm bolt, but uses an 11mm head. We sell that as a replacement part. Looks like it's pretty clean right there. So we'll zip this off. I want to see if anything drips out of it. I know my scooter leaks some combination of 2-stroke oil and gear oil. But let's see if there's any surprises here. You give it a little sniff. It doesn't really smell like gas. It might have a little bit, but that's kind of, yeah, I would say there's probably a little bit of gas in there because I know the scooter does flood, and I did take it on a 3,000-mile trip on the back of a Jeep bouncing around, so that probably, a couple times it's flooded. So normally when you fill it, you want to fill it until it's dribbling out of that fill hole. The next thing is we just want to drain it. It looks pretty clean from here. Probably the best situation for draining it would be a hot engine. Drain bolt's kind of right, a little bit in the front of the motor. Pretty common for these to get stripped out. Done a lot of repairs on the threads in the cases on these. The other thing that's coming out is there's a little crush washer that comes out, and just throw that away. There's also, I have some sealing compound on that bolt too. So just allow it to drain out. Pretty straightforward, kind of like changing just a small quantity of just regular motor oil in a 4-stroke engine, nothing that special there. Clean the bolt off. So it's right to a little trickle, and as you can see, it's not much oil. The good thing, I can smell a little bit of gas in there, but the good thing is I don't see a lot of flakes in there. Sometimes you'll see brass colored flakes, and that's typically from components in the clutch. It will kind of glimmer with some brass, maybe an indication your clutch. Sometimes it'll smell like kind of a burnt wood, or it's essentially the cork of your clutch burnt. Might be an indication you need to replace or service your clutch. is what you don't want to find is a bunch of silver metallic flakes in there, and that could be typically flakes from the gears and the bearings and aluminum parts, stuff you don't want to see in there, and sometimes you see that. So the oil's been thoroughly drained. I got my drain plug. I'm going to put a brand new crush washer. The original washers were probably fiber. They usually were a fiber washer. The replacements, which are actually even used on modern Vespas, are a copper crush washer. Usually just want to replace them every time. The part number is 000397. Get 2 of them. And one thing to keep in mind is sometimes the fill plug is actually a flat screw. You're wondering what I'm putting on the drain plug. It's not 100% necessary, but kind of holds it in place and seals it up a little bit better using like a thread sealant. This Loctite stuff works really good, and it doesn't really harden or glue in place. Before you even put the fill back in there, kind of wipe the surface, and definitely want to start it by hand. Pretty much these vintage Vespas, you don't really want to use power tools anywhere on, maybe zipping the flywheel off. But you know, threads are a little fragile on the cases on these, so I'm using a 1/4 inch ratchet to kind of get a feel for putting that drain plug in. And right there, I'm just giving it a little twist, and that's all it needs. So now you ask, how do you fill this? 2 ways to go about it. You're not going to pour this into like a normal hole you find on a motor, you know, like a 4-stroke car motor. Something I've been using for like literally 20 years, probably this bottle's been around at least for 15, is it's just a squeeze bottle. I mean, you can literally buy like a ketchup bottle with like the little spout that you find at the grocery store or Walmart. That works pretty good. If you want a little more control over filling it, we also sell a 60 milliliter syringe. And that's tool syringe, pretty easy to find on Scooter West web store. And you're gonna be able to put 50, 60 cc's of oil into the case. You're wondering how much these old ones hold. It's anywhere from 150 cc's to the very last P200Es, PXs were like almost 250 or 220 milliliters, somewhere in that range. It's not really an important number. You just fill it until it dribbles out of the fill hole. So I'm going to use my handy little ketchup container, and probably want to fill it up so you get a good easy squeeze. You could also put like a hose on the end of some type of squeeze container. That filled up. There you go, there's enough in there to do probably 3 changes on this vintage Vespa at least. And I got this little pig mat under here, kind of just absorbs any drips. So I got that fill plug clean. I'm gonna get the washer on my fill bolt ready to go, because once it starts dribbling out, that's when I'm gonna stop. So you just, pretty straightforward. Squeeze it in there, I'm going pretty fast. And I'll kind of do a little break. Not dribbling out yet. We're getting pretty close. I see a little dribble. And there you go, it's dripping. And that's all you need. Just enough where it's topped off, where it's just barely dripping out of that filler. And put that. And just like the drain bolt, voila, you're done. So that's all there is to it. In another date, I'll cover adjusting all the cables on a vintage Vespa. It's a pretty common thing you need to do. Always have a spark plug on you. Yeah, as for tune-ups on these, this one's one of the very earliest models that had electronic ignition. It's all original and it still works, so I don't really mess with it. But you have most of the other older Vespas, you know, from the 70s and older. Even a P125X from 1981 still had ignition points. And there's an older video that I've covered how to adjust the points, so that would be something that you need to keep on top of every 3,000 to 4,000 miles in typical operating of a vintage Vespa. But there you have it, how to change a gearbox oil. Pretty simple task. Hope you found that useful, whether you own a vintage Vespa or you're just kind of curious. See you on the next one. Robot here from scooterwest.com and Vespa Motorsport.